Have you ever experienced this? You blink and suddenly it's December again. You swear January was just yesterday, but somehow an entire year has vanished. And the strangest part, each year seems to disappear faster than the one before. If you're over 30, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're over 40, it's becoming alarming. And if you're over 50, you might be experiencing something close to temporal vertigo, a sense that time itself has gone into hyperdrive and you're just a passenger watching the landscape blur past your window. This isn't poetic exaggeration, and it's definitely not your imagination. In 2019, a team of researchers at Duke University published findings that disturbed the scientific community. They discovered that time perception doesn't just feel different as we age. It mathematically accelerates in measurable proportions. Here's what they found. A single year at age 50 is perceived as half the duration of a year at age 25. A year at 70 feels like a quarter of a year at 20. By the time you reach 80, a full year can feel shorter than a single childhood summer. Let that sink in for a moment. The researchers measured neural processing speeds across different age groups and discovered something that philosophers have suspected for centuries. Our brains literally process fewer frames per second of experience as we age. But here's where it gets interesting, and where modern science starts catching up to ancient wisdom. The acceleration isn't purely biological. It's not just about aging neurons or declining cognitive function. The primary driver is something else entirely. Something the ancient Egyptian sage Thoth described 5,000 years ago. He didn't call it time perception. He called it the veil of familiarity. And here's what nobody tells you about this veil. You can lift it. In this video, we're going to explore 3 interconnected mysteries. First, why each passing year feels shorter than the previous one, and the neuroscience behind this phenomenon that validates what mystics have known for millennia. Second, what Thoth actually taught about the relationship between consciousness and temporal experience, and why his insights are more relevant now than ever. Third, and most importantly, how to reclaim the expanded sense of time you experienced as a child, not through mental tricks or positive thinking, but by understanding and working with the actual pattern that's operating. No fluff, no wishful thinking, just the mechanism itself and how to engage with it consciously. But before we can understand the solution, we need to see what's really happening beneath the surface of your daily experience. Think about the last time you drove to a completely new destination. Maybe it was a job interview in an unfamiliar part of town, or visiting someone for the first time in a different city. You paid attention to everything, didn't you? Every turn, every landmark, every street sign. You were tracking, registering, encoding. The journey there felt substantial, real, present. Now think about the return trip. Same distance, same route, same amount of time on the clock. But something strange happened. The drive back felt significantly shorter, sometimes half as long. Why? This isn't mysticism. This is pure neuroscience. Your brain processes and encodes time through novelty detection. When something is new, unfamiliar, or demands attention, your brain activates what neuroscientists call encoding mode. It creates detailed memory traces, high-resolution recordings of the experience. More encoded information equals more memory formation. More memories equals the sensation of expanded time. But on the return journey, something shifts. Your brain recognizes the route. It's been mapped, catalogued, filed away. So it switches to what researchers call energy conservation mode. It stops creating detailed memories because it doesn't need to. The pattern is already known. Less encoding, fewer memories, collapsed time sensation. This is happening in your life right now on a massive scale, and most people don't realize it until they look back at the last decade and can barely distinguish one year from another. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people discover too late. The older you get, the more of your life becomes familiar territory. The same morning routine, the same commute, the same conversations, the same complaints, the same worries, even the same thoughts recycling endlessly. And with each repetition, your brain encodes less. William James, considered the father of American psychology, called this the law of perceptual novelty. He observed something remarkable. A single week for a child contains more registered experience than an entire year for an adult trapped in routine, not because the child lives more intensely, but because the child's brain is still in encoding mode for almost everything. Think about this from the perspective of a 5-year-old child. Everything is new. Every trip to the grocery store is an expedition. Every conversation contains words they've never heard before. Their brains are creating thousands of new neural connections daily, building a rich library of distinct memories. Now contrast this with the average 45-year-old. They've had the same breakfast for years, driven the same route to work thousands of times, had virtually identical conversations with the same people. Their brain recognizes these patterns and stops encoding them in detail. It's not laziness, it's efficiency. But the cost of that efficiency is the sensation that time is accelerating out of control. This is where the ancient Hermetic tradition offers us something that modern science is only beginning to understand. In the teachings preserved through Thoth and the Hermetic traditions, time was never measured solely in hours, days, or years. Those are useful measurements, certainly. But they're not the full picture. The Hermetic texts describe two fundamentally different types of temporal experience, chronos and kairos. Chronos is the time of the clock, sequential, linear, mechanical. This is the time that governs appointments, aging, decay. The time that marches forward regardless of what you do. Every human being lives under the rule of Chronos. We all age. We all move forward through the calendar. No one escapes this. But there's another dimension of time that operates simultaneously. Kairos is the time of experience, the time of the present moment. This is the time that expands when you're completely absorbed in something meaningful and contracts when you're bored or distracted. Think about it. An hour waiting in line at the DMV versus an hour in deep conversation with someone you love. Same chronos. Completely different kairos. 1 hour can feel like 10 minutes or 3 hours, depending entirely on the quality of your attention and engagement. And here's what Thoth understood that modern culture has forgotten. You cannot control chronos. The clock ticks at the same rate whether you're aware of it or not. But you absolutely can expand kairos. And in the expansion of kairos lies the secret to a life that feels truly lived, rather than merely survived. The veil of familiarity that Thoth described is what happens when you live exclusively in chronos while kairos collapses. Every day becomes identical to the one before it. Every week is a repetition of the last. Every month blurs into an indistinguishable mass. Your brain, recognizing this pattern, does what it's designed to do. It consolidates. It compresses repetitive experiences into a single meta-pattern. And when December arrives and you look back, January genuinely feels like it was yesterday, because neurologically, your brain has stored very little to distinguish one month from another. The neuroscience here is brutally clear. In that same 2019 study, researchers at Duke University measured neural processing rates across different age groups. What they discovered was shocking. As you age, your brain literally processes fewer frames per second of experience. A child's brain processes incoming sensory information like a high-definition film, rich, detailed, frame-dense. An adult's brain at 50 processes more like a low-resolution GIF, compressed, simplified, stripped of unnecessary detail. Less information processed and encoded per unit of chronos equals shorter perceived duration. But here's what the research revealed that most people miss. It's not primarily age that causes this compression. It's repetition. There are 70-year-old individuals who still experience time in an expanded way. They'll tell you that their days feel full, that months don't disappear, and there are 30-year-olds who already feel like time is slipping through their fingers like water. The difference isn't biological age, it's what researchers call attentional density, how much novel information you're encoding per unit of time. Thoth taught this principle in a different language. Time expands in proportion to presence. The more fully you inhabit the present moment, actually registering what's happening rather than functioning on autopilot, the more temporal experience you accumulate. Not more time on the clock, more time in consciousness. And ultimately, that's the only time that matters, because here's a truth that's hard to face. What you don't register, you didn't actually live. Try this thought experiment. Remember the last time you ate a meal while scrolling through your phone. You finished eating, but you couldn't recall the taste, the texture, whether you even enjoyed it. Those 10 or 15 minutes are gone from your experiential record. They happened in Chronos, the time moved forward, but they didn't happen in Kairos. They weren't lived. They were merely tolerated, endured, passed through. Now scale this up. How many meals have you eaten this way in the last year? How many conversations have you had while mentally planning the next thing? How many drives have you taken without seeing anything along the route? How much of your life are you experiencing as a phantom meal, present in body but absent in consciousness? This is the pattern that's stealing your time. Neuroscientists have identified what they call chronic attention deficit. This isn't clinical ADHD. It's something more pervasive and insidious. It's a gradual erosion of the capacity to maintain sustained attention caused by three primary factors. First, constant multitasking. Your brain wasn't designed to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. When you try, you don't actually multitask. You rapidly switch between tasks, and each switch costs attentional resources. Second, fragmented digital stimulation. The average person now checks their phone 96 times per day. That's once every 10 minutes during waking hours. Each check fragments attention, making sustained focus increasingly difficult. And third, the most important factor that most people don't understand: absence of genuine novelty. Your brain evolved to detect and respond to change in your environment, change in the landscape, change in the pattern, change in the experience. When everything becomes predictably similar, your brain does something remarkable. It stops recording in detail. It's an elegant solution to an energy problem. Why waste resources encoding the same pattern repeatedly? But the consequence is that time, neurologically, stops registering, and what doesn't register ceases to exist in your lived experience. Here's what most people misunderstand about novelty. You don't need exotic travel or extreme experiences to create it. Novelty isn't about external circumstances. Novelty is about internal attention. You can transform your mundane morning routine into an experience of expanded time without changing a single action. You don't need to do anything different. You need to register differently. Thoth called this practice the eye of Horus, seeing what has always been there as if for the first time. And here's how this works in practical terms. For the next 3 days, choose one activity you normally do on complete autopilot: brushing your teeth, taking a shower, walking to your car. And do it with total attention. Don't add anything, don't change anything, just register. When you brush your teeth, feel the bristles against your gums. Notice the taste of the toothpaste, not just mint, but the specific quality of this mint right now. Hear the sound of the bristles. Feel the temperature of the water when you rinse. When you shower, feel each droplet hitting your skin. Notice how the temperature differs between the stream and the ambient air. Listen to how the sound changes as you move. When you walk to your car, actually look. The color of the sky at this particular moment, not blue or gray, but this specific shade with these specific variations. The quality of the air against your skin, the sound of your footsteps. These 3 days will feel longer than the previous 3 weeks. Not because you did more, because you registered more. And something else will happen, something you need to be prepared for. You'll realize you've spent years, maybe decades, not registering. Years eating without tasting. Years driving without seeing. Years conversing without truly listening. And you'll feel a strange sadness. This isn't depression. It's grief. Grief for time that passed without being lived. But there's something deeper happening here that Thoth understood, and modern psychology is only beginning to recognize. The veil of familiarity isn't just a neural efficiency mechanism. It's also a defense system. When you're in survival mode, when your nervous system perceives threat, you can't afford to register everything around you. You need to conserve energy, focus only on the essential, ignore everything else. This saves your life in genuine crises, but it destroys your life in chronic routine. And here's the disturbing pattern. Most modern people live in chronic survival mode. Not because there's actual danger, but because the nervous system can't distinguish between real threats and perceived threats. Financial pressure, deadline stress, social expectations, endless comparison. All of these activate the same ancient survival circuits. And in survival mode, time accelerates. Not because you're living faster, Because you're barely living at all. You're surviving. And survival mode doesn't create rich, detailed memories. It registers threats, problems, what needs to be solved or escaped. This is why so many people look back at years or decades and see only a list of problems they solved, obligations they fulfilled, not a life they lived. But here's where Thoth's teaching offers a complete inversion of the conventional understanding. Time doesn't accelerate because you're aging. Time accelerates because you stopped inhabiting kairos. You stopped living in experiential time and began only surviving through chronological time. And you entered this mode because you believed you had to. That survival mode was necessary for actual survival. But it isn't. Thoth taught that the greatest luxury isn't free time, it's free attention. And free attention doesn't come from having less to do. It comes from doing what you do without internal resistance. Internal resistance is what consumes your attention. Doing something while wishing you were doing something else. Being somewhere while thinking about being elsewhere. Living one moment while planning the next. This fragments attention. And fragmented attention doesn't encode experience properly. And what isn't encoded wasn't truly lived. Let me show you the full mechanism. You age. Life becomes familiar. Brain stops encoding detail. You slip into chronic survival mode. This fragments attention further. Time perception accelerates. You look back, and 10 years feel like 2. Not because time accelerated, because you weren't there. But there's a critical error most people make when they understand this pattern. When people discover this teaching, they often try to force presence. They attempt to be in the moment. They practice mindfulness. They try to live intensely. And they fail. Why? Because presence isn't something you do. It's something that emerges when you remove what prevents it. And what prevents presence is resistance. Resistance to the current moment. Resistance to what you're experiencing. Resistance to what is. You cannot force presence. But you can release resistance, and when you release resistance, presence arises naturally, and time expands. Not because you're doing something special, but because you stopped fighting what's happening. Thoth taught that kairos isn't conquered, it's revealed. It reveals itself when you stop trying to be anywhere other than where you are. So here's what actually transforms everything. For the next 7 days, don't try to be present. Just observe how often you resist what you're doing. How many times you're in one place but wishing you were elsewhere, doing one thing but thinking about another, living one moment but planning the next. Don't try to change anything. Just observe, and you'll discover something unsettling. You spend most of your life resisting your own life, and it's this resistance that accelerates time, because you're not actually there. And when you're not there, time isn't registered. And when it's not registered, it wasn't lived. And when it wasn't lived, you look back and see only a blur. But there's something even deeper that Thoth encoded in the Hermetic texts. Time isn't linear. It's spiral. You're not moving forward in a straight line. You're ascending through cycles. And in each cycle, you encounter the same patterns, the same lessons, the same challenges, but at different levels of understanding. Here's the secret. The more conscious you become of the cycle, the slower it seems to move. Not because it actually moves slower in Chronos, but because you're registering more in Kairos. The more you register, the more you live. The more you live, the more time you experience. Not more time on the clock, but more time in consciousness, and ultimately that's what matters. Because when you look back, you won't ask how many years you lived. You'll ask how present you actually were. And the answer to that question isn't found on a calendar. It's found in the depth and richness of what you actually registered. So here's what actually matters. For the next 7 days, simply observe. Observe how often you're absent from your own life. Observe how often you resist what's happening. Observe how often you're in one place but wishing you were in another. And then, just once per day, choose a single moment. Any moment. And be there completely. Not because you have to. Because you can. And observe what happens. Time won't stop passing in Chronos, but you'll stop losing it in Kairos. And when you look back a year from now, these 7 days will feel longer than the previous 6 months. Not because you did more, because you were there. And being there, fully, completely, without resistance, is the only thing Thoth ever really taught. Not being in another time, not being in another place, being here, now, completely, and when you are, time doesn't accelerate. It expands. In exact proportion to your presence, it always has, you just forgot. But now you remember, and remembering isn't learning something new. It's recognizing what was always there. Time didn't escape. You just weren't watching. But now you are. And that changes everything.